Hello and welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. I am Shogun. Today we have the first in what will probably be a series of 3 or so podcasts exploring different avenues on the subject of transgender identity in modern society and its various implications. And today we'll start with an introduction and discussion on gender identity, gender expression, roles, and sex. And I think guiding us through that topic initially will be Hermes. Before we get started, please join the Temple Mount Discord server and follow and subscribe to the Temple Mount podcast and SoundCloud. You can find those at the top of the Temple Mount Discord server. That being said, welcome Hermes. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I want to kind of go on a little bit for a while and kind of explain a lot of the misconceptions around this issue, specifically when it comes to trans people. Of course, there were misconceptions all the way back for gay people. You know, their rights were denied. They couldn't marry until a little while ago. Continuously, they were demonized, considered to be an HIV-infested, group that should receive the scorn of society, and actually was considered to be a mental illness by the DSM-4. So the stigma was not only culturally, not only religiously, but also scientifically as well. It was a very difficult and tough battle, I guess you could say, for, let's say, different people to kind of fit in society, in a society that was afraid of them, and in a society that did almost everything they could to prevent them from being accepted. So first things first, what is gender identity? What is gender expression? What is biological sex? And what is sexual orientation? What is the difference between each of these? So there's a huge difference between gender identity and biological sex. And because there's a difference between those two, it is not saying that they're equal, which is a very common trick that you will see happening all around. When someone says they identify as a woman, a lot of the times you hear that, oh, well, you're trying to pretend that you're a biological woman and you're trying to trick me with this language trickery or whatever, something of that nature. Of course, everyone that actually understands gender identity knows that it's entirely different from biological sex. And of course, gender expression and gender identity are also different. Gender identity is basically how you identify, how you feel about yourself is the best way of putting it. How you authentically, genuinely feel who you are. That's it. As for gender expression, it's how you behave outside and if it falls within the stereotypes of gender roles. Those two may or may not align. They don't have to. And then we have biological sex, which is determined by chromosomes, as well as many other things, actually. So first of all, sex is not binary, it's bimodal, but bimodal is not too far away from binary. What it means is that the vast majority of people fall within a binary, but there is a double type bell curve kind of thing. And I'm going to actually post a graph that explains this, but basically, there are many different biological differences when it comes to sex, including hormones. Hormones are a biological sex characteristic, also known as secondary sex characteristics. So transgender people usually, when they take HRT, have the biological secondary sex characteristics while retaining the primary sex characteristics, depending if they, of course, went through puberty or not, and that is, of course, a big part of it. And then there is sexual orientation, which, again, is totally separate from those. You could be a transgender woman that's into women. Nobody says that you can't be a trans woman that's into women. Nobody says that you can't act manly but still, be into women or whatever. Those are all separate dimensions, and they don't interconnect necessarily. They do affect each other, but they don't have to align, and that restriction is artificial. So sexual orientation is basically, are you heterosexual, or do you align more towards being gay, or do you fall somewhere in between, such as being bisexual or pansexual, which is I think more commonly on, like, it's a more encompassing term than bisexual. So let's go with sex just real quick here. So the main differences between assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth individuals is usually the genitalia. That's usually how it's determined. And your chromosomes usually determine what kind of genitalia you have. Of course, there are people that have XXY or, yeah, XXY, I believe. I will post a diagram here. I'll post everything as I continue on this. So, give me a second, sorry. Where did I put it? Jeez. Ugh. Oh my god. It's probably in my picture folder. I don't even see it here. Weird. Oh, no, here it is. Okay, I'm gonna post this, which is a more scientific understanding of sex and what actual biologists understand when it comes to sex. There is a lot of factors that determine sexual characteristics, so to speak. Chromosomes, genes that are turned off and on, which can be turned off and on by hormones through epigenetics and methylation of the DNA. And of course, there are many other things as well. It's very, very complicated, actually. And so I don't know where to start when it comes to the whole issue. I guess let's talk about why this is important. I think that's important. Like that's a way to start this. So first of all, the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus, whatever, is historically a very vulnerable community that has been discriminated again over and over again, and this has been recorded in history. There has been attempts at conversion therapies, which has led people to suicide. And of course, when it comes to transgender individuals, the suicide rate is staggering, which points out that the treatment of these individuals really is a matter of life and death, and any sort of callousness towards the information that is portrayed about them can actually have serious harm. And God, I have so many tabs. It's making it painful for me to point out. All right, so this is from glad.org, which I'm going to also post. It explains a lot of the FAQs on transgenders, but here's just some dry statistics. 29% of transgender people live in poverty, compared to 14% of the general population. 30% of transgender people report being homeless at some point in their lives, with 12% saying it was within the past 12 months. Transgender people experience unemployment at 3 times or 300% the rate of the general population, with rates for people of color up to 4 times the national unemployment rate. 30% of transgender people report being fired, denied promotion, or experience mistreatment in the workplace due to gender identity in the past 12 months. 31% of transgender people experienced mistreatment in the past year in a place of public accommodation, including 14% who were denied equal service, 24% who were verbally harassed, and 2% who were physically attacked because they were transgender. 40% of respondents reported attempting suicide in their lifetime, nearly 9 times the attempted suicide rate in the United States. And so now that we understand some of the important factors here, there is the misconception that trans people are trying to force society to accept them. That is not the case. What trans people want is equal rights. That's it. And getting caught into the semantics of what is a woman or what isn't a woman, although I know this is the topic of discussion today, kind of diverts the issue from what is actually really important, which is harm reduction of a very vulnerable group. And it also serves as a form of putting trans people on a defensive, which they continuously have to justify their existence and their validity, which further exacerbates the problems they face. We have had 100 anti-trans bills recently, put into, 100 transgender bills that have passed recently. I will post this information,
Oh,
but yes,
anti-trans?
yes, I'll post it.
Oh, based.
Wait, really? Okay. Um, I didn't expect that. So where is the... Oh, here we go. Here's the data on that, which goes into it. Well, actually, I'm going to pause and get some questions because it feels like I've gone on a far too long of a monologue. So I'm going to pause here.
That was very good. Thank you for the introduction. Does anyone have a question? Anyone in the audience? I know I had one.
Wanted to make a comment. I'm in Canada, and in Toronto, the statistics you were talking about, they must be completely different in Canada than they are in the US. Because in Toronto, that's a big chunk of the population is part of that community, right? The LGTB plus whatever, right? And I have not witnessed any of what you were naming the statistics on at all in the workplace, right? Or even
Yo,
like
I'm a sorry. I'm gonna add a comment. I've lived as a girl.
I'm sorry, we'd love to hear your comment, but that was a plain interruption. Go ahead, Kashika.
After Kashika finishes, then you go.
Yeah, basically, I just was wondering if you knew what the statistics were in Canada, right? Because it sounds like it's very different. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead with the gentleman that was or person that
Okay.
was.
Mute. So go ahead. What was your
Yeah, sorry. I totally interrupted. I thought you were done. I'm a little bit drunk. My bad. But I was just saying. I took estrogen and lived as a girl for 2 years. I've experienced the trans experience. If you had any questions about personal stuff, just ask me. I'm a little drunk, but I'm gonna do my best not to get interrupted.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have an open discussion after. So we'd love to hear about your experience and what your thoughts are about the subject. But maybe we'll ask a few questions of Hermes first, and then we'll turn it over to the open discussion. We'll talk to you a bit more about your experience at that point. Well, thanks.
Yeah, I'll go. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. If someone else is talking, just try your best not to speak until they're finished. I had one question, right? Do you think that... Okay, well, let me think. What's the best question to ask first? So,
Can I continue with the question? Basically, I was wondering if Hermes knew what would cause a population to have such a difference. You know what I mean? I'm assuming that in some of the larger city centers, maybe like in Los Angeles, let's say, for example, right? They're not gonna, those statistics are probably not gonna be the same. But do you know what would contribute to that type of high numbers for those statistics that you were talking about with
Yeah.
that community?
Sorry. Yeah, I do actually. So there's a lot of differences between the parties and different groups and how they go about it. So and I'm gonna find the statistics. I'm really bad at. I should have put this in order, but basically, according to a Pew Research Center study that goes over the whole acceptance and what people feel and surveys and blah blah blah. Conservatives, specifically Republicans, are usually very opposed, and Democrats are usually very accepting. And there's a huge divergence over there. And usually in urban cities, those are mostly Democratic. Sorry, those are cities that are filled with Democrats. Usually, there's a disproportionate amount of Democrats in those areas, and in suburbs and other areas, usually there is a disproportionate amount of Republicans, and thus you can see a very huge difference. So, like when it comes to Democrats, there's like a 70%, acceptance, and when it comes to like 30% opposition, or like conservatives, it was something like 70% opposition, 30% acceptance, something like that. I will post the data. I'm really sorry for uh, how incompetent I'm being with the information. Here's one study about growing acceptance. So there's the good news is that over time, there is a statistically significant increase in growth. More and more people know someone who is transgender, and as thus because they know it, and it's either somebody they know at work, family member, whatever, this socialization can eventually lead to more humanization and understanding. This, of course, can go back to racism as well. So racism is usually very significant in racially homogenous areas. Countries like Japan, for example, have a higher propensity for racism, even though they're very racially homogenous. It turns out that if you know someone that's of a different race, a lot of the racist preconceptions that you have fall away, and you get to humanize other people. So as more and more people are coming out being trans, we see a very significant shift from non-understanding, rejection, and disgust towards humanization, acceptance, and attempting to understand at the very least. So yeah, I think that kind of answers the question.
So I have a question. Is it possible to be a transgender person but not experience gender dysphoria?
Yeah, actually, that is possible. It's, as far as I know, rare, but it is possible. I mean, you can identify. You got to be you have a crazy strong mind, I guess. I don't know, but if you identify with a gender that is different than how your body is built, so to speak. Of course, again, if you take puberty blocker, HRT, many stuff, change it. The point is, this incongruity usually leads to a lot of suffering, and it is no wonder why the suicide rates are so high, although social factors such as rejection from family being one of the biggest ones are the most significant contributing factors towards that. However, it is possible for someone to not suffer from that incongruity. It's rare, but it's possible.
Funny you say that because I probably fall into that category. So
Awesome. I'm super glad for you.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, is being transgender an innate, like, immutable quality that people have? In other words, that it's like just the way it is, and it's permanent?
So the way I understand it is that it's quite complicated. It's like there are studies that talk about prenatal exposure to hormones. So like when you were in the womb, you were exposed to certain hormones, which then kind of changes your brain structure, and that could be one of the factors. Early socialization perhaps could be part of it. I'll post some studies, although to be fair, there are, let's say, there's a limited amount of information because brain scans isn't something you can gather a large amount of data on, especially when it comes to trans groups and the whole control and everything. This area of study is incredibly difficult. Good news is more people are studying this. There's also kind of a misunderstanding that there's a brain sexual dimorphism with the brain. It's actually a lot more similar, and there's a spectrum. I'll post that as well. But still, there's generally some differences, some general differences that we can see on average. Some has to do with like white matter and gray matter, certain areas of connections, and blah blah blah. I will actually post all this afterwards or whenever I can. Sorry, I don't want to delay. So here, this goes over how there's like a lack of information and all that, which is good. It's always good to look at the other side. But here is some related to genes. So it could be genes, it could be exposure to hormones, prenatal hormones. Potentially, it could be early socialization. I don't know. We do know that conversion therapy doesn't work. So I can post studies or, yeah, vast array of information on that. So like the idea that there's like this agenda that's converting people is kind of fallacious. The reality that seems to be happening is that there was a group that was, and I mean like by Hollywood as well. I mean Hollywood, what was it? the Pet Detective or whatever, and many areas where they depicted trans people as psychopaths, violent people, disgusting, blah, blah, blah. So there was great cultural disgust and hatred for trans people and for gay people as well. Over time, of course, we can see this changing. And here's a good post by The Conversation that explains or tries to explain why there's a sudden increase. Basically, it's that due to more freedom, I guess, so to speak, more people feel safe coming out and living their lives more authentically. And that can explain the rise. Now, some people say maybe the rate is disproportional. Maybe it's too much. And a way to account for that is to look at the percentage of the population that is expected to be trans based on areas that we have a large amount of data on, and then we can compare it to other areas. And if we see very small amount of transgender people there, percentage-wise, it is more likely than not that it's actually an underrepresentation. We should expect even a further rise until it reaches expected percentage values. And for some reason, when it comes to UK, the information, especially with prison, because I was going before, it's super limited. So there's that. But yeah, I don't know, it's a complex question. My understanding is that there are many factors and there's a lot of research that needs to be done. I'm going to end it on that.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment before I ask perhaps another one or two?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, what's your view on how society classifies transgender people, and like, do you have any knowledge of how different societies in the past classified them? Because there is evidence of like different classes of people that were either outcasted or welcomed in as like a not like a special role, but like a different role in the society that would be considered like a transgender role. Like you have like in certain tribes and like Native American tribes, that like that's just something I know about. You'd have like men wearing women's clothes and gathering instead of hunting, certain things like that. Just I'm wondering if you have any, if you want to speak on that.
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with certain cultures around the world that have a third gender, if I remember correctly, or the two-spirit people or whatever.
Yeah,
I
Two
don't know.
Spirit is a thing that kind of happened in the '90s, but there is they called it something else. But yeah, that was a thing in a lot of Iroquois tribes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know my understanding of history, unfortunately, is limited. I'm pretty sure I've actually gone over the information. If I had any capacity to retain information, if I had, good retention, I would probably be able to answer your question a lot better, but I'm gonna have to admit ignorance at this point.
So if somebody is transgender, is transitioning medically through hormones, surgeries, etc., in your opinion, is that the only option, or are there other options for how to deal with it?
So I had a really cool study from the previous debate that we did that had like I think 9,000 studies or whatever. What the fuck is going on here? Jesus Christ, somebody just called me. Sorry about that. Weird. Anyways, God, that distracted the crap out of me. Yeah, so I'll see if I can find that. It's a compilation of like vast array of studies that show that yes, treating gender dysphoria with the goal of harm reduction is the goal, and it seems that gender affirmation therapy, HRT, and um, and also surgery, I think, show that alleviates some of the symptoms and is the medical approach towards harm reduction. There is, of course, the other side that has been tried, which is conversion therapy, which has been considered torture by multiple organizations worldwide. And let me post Actually, I think I already posted the torture thing. I'll find the study thing if I can. Um, um, but in the meantime, yeah, it's not my opinion. It's what the data shows, that the medical experts in the vast area of studies, of course, there will be outliers, which is why we need to look at the entire picture and not selectively look at one or two studies that seem to show a different response or answer. God, I wish I had that. It's so good. It's a very nice compilation. I might be able to find it. In the meantime, if anyone else has any other questions.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question, which is just, isn't there a third option, right? So you're kind of establishing two choices of either conversion therapy, which I don't know too terribly much about what that actually entails, but it's thought of as this like harmful process to change you, and then on the other hand, transitioning. But wouldn't a third option just be like receiving counseling and therapy and support of other kinds to help you deal with your dysphoria, accept, you know, the reality of your situation in terms of like how you feel, and the, you know, in other words, wouldn't there be such a thing as like not conversion therapy but acceptance therapy, being like, okay, you were born a boy or you were born a girl, you identify differently and you're suffering, and let's like talk about that, and maybe there's medication or maybe there's activities you can do. Like, isn't that another option to try and give?
You mind if I speak on that?
Well, sure. I want, but you, both of you can.
Are you done? Okay.
That's my question. Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, like no counselor or medication did jack shit for did anything for my pain and suffering, whatever. I had to take the estrogen and whatever and transition and love as a girl, and then I realized from like an inner place, I had to realize from within that the outward expression didn't matter, and I needed to connect to something greater than myself and be happy and fulfilled without being complete. You know what I mean? And like a really broad spiritual perspective. I don't know if I'm making sense at all, but yeah, that can maybe work. It's just like whether or not that I don't know. I feel like everyone should have access to that experience of transitioning and doing the whole thing if they feel these feelings, and then you know um, that should be supplemented with it, but that it really has to come from within if you're going to have that experience of accepting that you're going to feel different than your outward expression and how people treat you. That's a really hard thing to do.
I'm going to answer it too, but in the meantime, I posted it's a very nice compilation of studies in the voice chat. I'm posting all the stuff there. But I would actually consider, so the thing is, you should never push one way or another. That's why the professionals kind of assess, and there's a long-term assessment. I went over this in the past. But yeah, basically, the professional way is to ask questions and understand what the situation is using your medical expertise, and then provide the best advice you can following the best guidelines backed by the science. Basically, is usually the case. And if it turns out that someone, let's say, by asking questions, is actually on the fence or some weird thing, then sure, I guess in that sense, you can say, yeah, they could potentially go the other routes. But that's exactly what's happening right now. However, conversion therapy, which is basically saying, well, you were born a boy, or like blah, 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 you got to accept the reality. That actually is part of conversion therapy, accept your reality. That is pushing someone in a direction, and that is what I'm very much against. I'm very much against pushing children in any direction that kind of tries to fuck with their mind. I would like, to ask questions, get the information, and then follow the best medical practices. That's it. So there's that.
But just one thing I have to push back on. I don't think you could say that therapy aimed at helping a biological male accept that accept themselves as they are could be called conversion therapy. I think that would be a misuse of the term conversion therapy. Like, that is not conversion therapy. That would be simply therapy to help you deal with your feelings about yourself or whatever. So I don't think you can group that in the same category as trying to turn gay people straight, to say that, like, you're a boy and you have bad feelings about that, and we're going to try and have productive ways of dealing with those feelings.
Right. So the reason why this is, I would consider it conversion therapy, is because you're pushing in a direction. So saying that accept your reality, what the fuck does that even mean? As we know, there is a difference between sex, which we went over, and identity. So nobody is denying reality by being trans. You're not denying reality. Nobody's taking away the definition of woman. Nobody's taking away the definition of man. It's more of an expansion, if anything, just like how you can be a biological mother, or you can be a mother that adopted a child. You're still a mother. So it's really, yeah, that would be a form of pushing. So yeah, I would be very much against that.
See it that way, right? It's not about pushing them one way or the other. It's just about providing non-transition based therapeutic support to treat dysphoria. So you're recognizing that you are suffering from dysphoria. We are providing counseling, therapy, and other forms of treatment to reduce your experience of dysphoria, but that treatment is not based on the model that the best way to do this is to, medically transition your body to more closely resemble the identity you have. Instead, the treatment model is, talk therapy and other known methods of therapy to reduce the dysphoria and suffering that you're feeling, but not to change your body. In other words, to address it on the mental and emotional and psychological level rather than on the physical level. Because when you think about it, if you're experiencing suffering because of the disconnect between your body and your mind, sure, you can try and approach that by changing your body so the disconnect is less than with your mind. But you could also try and change it on the mental level and change the way you think and feel about it. And all I'm saying about that is I don't think you can possibly call that conversion therapy. That's not the same thing as that.
So when it comes to therapy, yeah, I'm not against therapy. That's part of it, and they're not mutually exclusive. Usually you go through therapy first, there's a long period of assessment, and then based on what the medical professional determines, to be the best choice, based on the available data and the best medical practices, based on the studies, which I posted a huge compilation there, actually it turns out that changing the body is a big deal. So, like, just to try to visualize this, imagine a female growing a beard the next day, right? The suffering that she would get. And in that sense, removing the beard seems to be very obvious of a choice. Like, this is an intuitive appeal right now that I'm doing because I already posted the data. So you could definitely provide therapy and harm reduction therapy, of course. Telling people to accept to have a beard when they don't want to is a form of manipulation, forcing them to, in essence, live a life they don't want to, and then saying that this is just, you have to accept reality. No, you don't. You have to accept reality, but you don't have to conform to societal norms because they feel awkward about you.
Right, but I don't think that's quite what I'm saying, right? So it's not about forcing anybody to do anything. I'm just saying, if you're a person who's experiencing gender dysphoria, it seems to me that you have multiple completely coherent avenues in which you could respond to that, only one of which would be transitioning. So I'm not saying transitioning wouldn't be a good option for some people, or that many people might not choose that option. But I'm just saying, it seems to me that there is also other options that make a lot of sense, such as trying to approach it from the perspective of, coming to terms with it or making peace with it rather than changing your body. So you're experiencing dysphoria. You could try to change your body so that the dysphoria is less, or you could try to reduce the dysphoria through other methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, or other methods that are similar to how other mental conditions or mental sufferings are treated or reduced. And it seems to me that because medically transitioning is not without consequences, risks, and harms of its own, right? Whether that's, medical, like some side effect of the hormones that are taken, or whether it's something else, like whatever it may be. Like, none of these are without cost. None of these are perfect methods. They're all going to involve some kind of risk or consequence. So it seems to me that for a lot of people, it may be completely legitimate to say, yeah, I'm not going to take hormones. I'm not going to take surgery. I'm going to try and, go to therapy and do other things and try and come to terms with the situation and not change it.
So I mean, again, the data shows that is not the case. And again, the beard analogy, I guess, is not enough. Imagine someone wants to be an astronaut, and you say, "Well, you gotta admit, you're not meant to be an astronaut. That's just not who you are." This is a way of kind of push. Again, it is a push. The current practice is to ask questions and based individually on each individual, give them the treatment that is most likely to lead to harm reduction. In most cases, that's gender affirmation therapy. Of course, this is for people that have persisting gender dysphoria, of course. And this explains why. If you have persistent gender dysphoria, and if changing your body reduces gender dysphoria, logical consequence is then taking treatment that reduces gender dysphoria will lead to a better mental health outcome, less harm reduction and more harm reduction and so on. Also, I want to point out that transgender isn't a disease. And it's not a disorder being transgender. Gender dysphoria, however, the discomfort from the incongruity is considered a disorder because it has negative side effects. Reducing gender dysphoria is the goal, which is what most practitioners do. And so I'm just going to read the overview from this massive thing from Cornell University. We conducted a systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published in English between 1991 and June 2017 that assessed the effects of gender transition on transgender well-being. We identified 55 studies that consist of primarily research on this topic, of which 51, 93%, found that gender transition improves the overall well-being of transgender people, while 4% report mixed or null findings. We found no studies concluding that gender transition causes overall harm. As an added source, we separated, including 17 additional studies that consist of literature reviews and practitioner guidelines. And of course, we can go look at DSM-5. I did all that before. So what you're saying, like if someone is suffering and they have a desisting gender dysphoria, then in that case, obviously, the best practice is not to go through a permanent change. And that is how it's done. So, of course, the more data comes out, the better.
Have we broached the subject of sports yet?
No, I'm not. I mean, I could go into that, but I want to actually go into a little bit of a cultural area, and you can go back to rights a little bit more.
Yeah.
But
I would specifically like to not talk about the issue of sports today, because we're going to do a whole separate episode about that, and I don't really want to get into it in this episode.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about sociology and certain theories out there. So there is, of course, the rational self-interest. I forgot exactly what it was, but there is a rational self-interest theory that explains why people behave the way they do. And a lot of the times people perceive certain groups as threats. And of course, that is not organic sometimes, and sometimes it is organic, and sometimes a mix of both. So I'm going to explain social frustration theory is basically society based, its structure is somehow leading to frustration, and a lot of the times that can lead to scapegoat theory, or the idea that you blame all of your ills and problems you have in society on a group. This has been done over and over again. This has been done for Black people, gay people, Chinese people, Hispanics, Italian Americans back in the old days, Irish Americans, believe it or not. So it's a thing that continuously happens, and there is a trail of evidence that we can go over. So the idea here, the way I understand it, is that this is just the next step. And because this is a more new phenomenon, it's easier to target. There's less evidence on it. There's less data on it. And it's a very easy scapegoat. And I'm actually going to talk about the cultural aspect. So a lot of the times in media, certain groups, and I'll be open, conservatives, usually push the ideas that people, I'm just going to say trans people are pedophiles, trans people are rapists, and of course they cherry pick for that. Trans people are violent, trans people are infested with AIDS and all sorts of shit. Trans people are sexual deviants and are inherently sexual by nature for some reason. Trans people are trying to force others to accept them. Trans people are men who are just like men. They're just pretending. Trans people are a waste of taxpayer money. Trans people are taking advantage of their trans status. Trans people are abusing women. Trans people have ruined, well, we're not going to talk about the ruined women's sports in detail. Gonna mute that. Obviously, I don't know who the hell did that. It was insane. And so I'm going to skip that part. There's the trans agenda that forces people to use a language that defies biological reality. Trans people are collapsing Western civilization, and the trans agenda is converting people into being trans through propaganda. The entire purpose of this is to create an image that trans people are your enemy. They must be stopped. Their success is your failure. Your way of life is on the line. The children are on the line. We must protect our women because if they get their way, women will suffer. Your money is on the line. Basically, it is to paint the worst image possible of a vulnerable group that already has enough problems to deal with. A lot of the times, this is done through the veneer of concern. And like, think about the children, think about the women. Selectively finding very, very small sample size data or anecdotal evidence to exacerbate the issue or disproportionately focus on a non-problem or to find a problem where none exists. Most of the times you will notice that this is not done with the purpose of treating this or helping this or alleviating the situation. It is almost always done with the attempt to demonize, ostracize, turn them into an outgroup, and to use political power to limit their rights and take away their freedoms as much as possible, and to kind of prevent them from being more normalized, because that, as I said before, is portrayed as a threat to the way of life and Western civilization as a whole. And also, I think I already said this, but in order to not seem like monsters, like just saying they're pedos and rapists and violence and blah, 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 this is, as I said, it's done in the form of a Trojan horse tactic, and some people might remember it from the old days with computer viruses that were called Trojan horse viruses. Today we still have that too. And it really is a Trojan horse. You think that a person is trying to care about the situation while actually spreading basically tactics or information or propaganda that does lead to harm, that does lead to demonization, outgrouping of a certain group, and that of course leads to political consequences, which is where I focus on, really. I don't give a shit about what people think as much as so long as they don't take away rights or disproportionately abuse or take advantage of groups. We know that trans people are one of the most vulnerable people in society when it comes to violence, hate crimes. They're raped in an insane rate. I think it was like 9 times in the rate from straight people in prison. So that's 900% increase or something like that. It's just basically a group that is not very well understood. And it's a very small group, by the way, but the focus and attention on this group it serves multiple purposes. One, of course, we can all unite and rally against an enemy that we kind of intuitively feel disgusted about. But also, it can serve as a way of diverting attention from real problems, such as actual prison reform, the criminal justice system, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, and many other things, infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. It's a very easy way to create a sensational, clickbaity article or news that gets a lot of clicks, that creates a lot of profit. which doesn't actually help anyone. It doesn't propose any real solutions. Most of those articles don't propose solutions. And yeah, it's just, it is what we have to deal with. It's happened before with gay people, with